to Creative Conversations. I'm Mia Moore, and each week we sit down with a guest to uncover their unique journey, share insights, and maybe even discover what fuels their creativity. Whether you're an artist, a dreamer, or just curious about the creative process, you're in the right place. Let's get started. So today I'm thrilled to be joined by Katie Gowers. She is a Chichester-based poet and writer, and a mother as well. So would you like to share a little bit about yourself and what got you kind of into poetry and your writing process?
Yeah, so I started writing poetry about 18 months ago, and really, to be honest, it was a way of just getting all the noise that was in my head about motherhood and about things going on in my life out of my head.
Yeah.
So it started out as just something I did for me. I would literally have a notebook by my bed and I'd write stuff in it, and that was all it was. And then I started going to a writing group.
Excellent.
Called Words Out Loud in Chichester, and they encouraged me to start sharing my poetry, standing up and doing open mics.
Oh wow.
And then from there I've sort of put together this collection of poems that I'm publishing in a book next month.
Brilliant.
So yeah, so it's fairly new for me. It's a career
new
change for me, new territory, but it's something I'm really enjoying doing.
Brilliant. I bet it's nice to kind of show those raw moments from when you've captured it in that book, because that's such a personal time.
Absolutely.
And actually being able to share that vulnerability that I think all mothers can relate to.
Yes.
But obviously we've all got our own different pathways within that, but I think it's really important that we kind of normalise that.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of it happens kind of behind closed doors, in your sitting room or in your bedroom, often alone with your child.
Yes.
And we would just before we started recording, we were saying, like, when you meet up with other mums, there's so much else going on. You've got the kids with you, you're trying to keep track of things, and you often don't manage to have proper conversations. And so it's nice sometimes to actually realise that you're not in it on your own. Definitely. And all of those feelings, whatever, whether positive or negative, or whether something you learn from or whatever, that actually you're not alone in that, and that everyone goes through some version of that themselves. So, and
quite fittingly, just like the title of your book, you're not just a mum.
Yes.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about the title of your book?
Yeah, so it came from when I first started writing, I wrote a poem called Not Just a Mum, and it was talking about how there are so many other things. You know, you have to be you have to do art, and you have to deal with the tantrums, and you have to cook the dinner, and you have to be a dietitian, you have to, and there's all these other roles. So it started with that, and then as I wrote the book and as I did more writing generally, I realised that actually it was becoming a story about identity, my identity as well. And so the last poem in the book is I'm Not Just a Mum, and it's looking at, actually, I'm a poet and I'm a writer and I have my own dreams, and being a mum is the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me, but it doesn't define me. It's not who I am. It's not part of my experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's sort of the starting and ending point of the book, is that, and the journey through the book is my journey in motherhood and my experiences, and some of the things that I have learned being a mother, because you learn a huge amount about the world.
In the deep end.
Absolutely, but also about yourself. And I think for me it became something that sort of evolved from writing purely about my relationship with my son into writing about my identity and how I identify myself. So yeah, that's where the title's Not Just a Mum, and it kind of is quite fitting for that. That's
brilliant.
I think.
And again, I think that's something that so many of us mums relate to, because I think specifically in the first year, everything is baby, and
everything.
It's so overwhelming and so consuming that I think we do forget that we are anything other than mum.
Yeah, and I think society does it as well. You'll meet someone and they'll immediately ask about baby.
Yes.
And it's such a natural thing to do. I do it myself. You know, I'll meet a mum out and about, and I'll ask how their kid's doing at school, or ask whatever they're up to. And I think suddenly your priority and your focus and everything in your life is keeping this small child alive and happy and safe and warm. And you kind of get, well, I certainly felt like I got lost in that. And that I just didn't really know who I was anymore. Like, my career had, for various reasons, had ended. I had a baby in lockdown, which put a whole nother level of complication on things.
And stress, I'd imagine.
And stress, And then I'm being hundreds of miles away from my family. So that was really tough. And then my marriage broke down as well. And so in the time that I've had my son, my life has completely changed. I got to a point where I was like, I don't actually know who I am anymore. So I think that's something that we don't really talk about as much as maybe we should.
And I think even nowadays in today's society, when we're told to talk and we're told to share our emotions, I feel like there's still a pride a mother has that she has to be this fully functioning and she works, she looks after her baby, everything's perfect, she looks after the house. And there's still that responsibility that kind of looms over you, and the pressure to get back to work. And people will ask you, oh, when are you going back to work? When are you doing that? And it's like you're torn. Do I look after my child? Do I go back to a career? And it's, like you say, this society that has almost not ruined motherhood, but it's tinged it, I think, from how it could be.
I completely agree with you. And I think there is so much pressure on mums to do everything. And actually, it's all right if the laundry doesn't get done. It's all right if you haven't had a shower in 4 days. We've every mum I know has been there. It's okay if you're struggling and it's just too much today. It's okay if the kids are eating chicken nuggets for 2 days in a row. You know, if you're fulfilling the main priorities of being a mother, keeping them safe, keeping them warm, keeping them fed, keeping them happy, keeping them loved, that's the most important. Then the other stuff, it can slide. It will still be there tomorrow.
Definitely. That pile of dishes will still be there.
It will still be, and there'll be more. You know, and it doesn't matter how many times you tidy the toys off the floor; they'll
reappear.
Absolutely. And be even. I mean, my son sees a tidy sitting room as a potential to make more mess. So, you know, I guess my point is that we could all do with just taking the pressure off of it. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be doing everything. There's time later in life to sort your career out. There's time later in life. You know, some mums have to work and go straight back to work. But even that doesn't really work, because you have to pay for childcare, and then you're stuck in this loop of whether do I pay for childcare and work, or do I not work and not get an income
and stay at home.
And you just can't. I kind of, there are times in my journey where I've kind of felt I just can't win, and I just have to do the best that I can. And that's enough. What I'm doing is enough.
Absolutely. And I think it's reminding yourself that you're doing 100%. A fantastic job. Even if it was just ensuring that your child is loved. That's, above all, the absolute best that you can do.
Absolutely.
Did you find that you naturally went to writing when you were in those kind of depths of motherhood, or was it something that you've done in the past?
No. Well, I have written in the past, but not in this way. I think the writing came from I had all these thoughts in my head, and I was really struggling to process them, and I just sat down one day and just literally just did a mind dump of everything that was going on. And I think the other thing that changed for me was because I was starting to read out loud to my son. I never read out loud. I very rarely do presentations. My job hasn't really involved doing that. But I started reading a lot of stories, children's stories that rhyme, and I started reading out loud more, and I started telling, you know, he'd ask for a story and I'd have to make a story up on the spot, inevitably about construction vehicles or cars or, you know, something that I know nothing about. And I think that sort of triggered something. And so when I was kind of thinking and writing, it started to flow. I started to get the stories in that form naturally.
Yeah,
it kind of came to me rather than I went looking for it.
Brilliant.
But that's really nice because it feels very natural, and quite often I'll have been thinking about a topic and then the poem sort of arrives and it's almost fully formed.
That's amazing.
As it arrives. So it's been a bit of a I've had to kind of work out how it happens, and I have to capture it when it happens, because if I don't, then it's gone.
Yes.
Which I find really interesting. And inevitably it arrives when I'm driving the car, or at 2 o'clock in the morning, or when I'm in the shower. You know, those times that it's really inconvenient. Really inappropriate. It's not helpful. If I sit down at a table and write, I can often write, but the best stuff comes when I'm not actually thinking about it, and then it's trying to capture that. So it's been a bit of a process, and certainly something I'm still working on. And then performing is a whole another thing, because you get feedback from the crowd as you're reading, and also it's not something I'm particularly naturally comfortable with, so it's something I get quite nervous about. So that's been quite interesting, seeing how quite often poems will read one way when you read them, but if you vocalise them, they read another way. So that's quite fun to play with and see the difference. And also people will come up and say, oh, I really like that, I really related to X, Y and Z, and that wasn't what you were writing about at all. So people bring their own experiences to, of course they do, in all art, it doesn't matter if it's a painting or a writing or a video or whatever it is.
Completely subjective,
completely subjective. And so it's really interesting to see what other people's responses to it are, what memories it evokes for them, or like a different slant on the topic that I hadn't even considered, but that someone else can see. So that's really fascinating. I find that really interesting.
So can you tell us a little bit about where you generally speak?
So there are spoken word open mic nights. There's several in Chichester. Words Out Loud organised one, there's one at Havana, there are various pop-up ones, and it's just an opportunity to go. You don't have to speak, you can just go and sit and listen, and the talent is incredible, and the variety of stuff is incredible. Or if you want to, you can put your name down and stand up and read something, and the diversity of topics is really interesting. And you'll get really funny ones, you'll get really deep ones, you'll get ones about current events, and it's a really nice mixture of people and a really nice mixture of stories, and it's a lovely way to kind of talk to other people that are doing something similar.
And to I bet it feels quite inspiring being in such a creative atmosphere, because everybody's there for the same reason. No, and again, like you say, that you don't have to talk.
No, absolutely not.
How much would you say people generally do? Do most people get involved?
The two main ones that I do, I'd say most people get involved. Brilliant. But not everyone gets involved every week, and there are definitely people that come just to listen. Whether they're writers themselves or not. So it's a very varied, but you do tend to, I'd never heard it. I didn't even know what a spoken word open mic was until 6 months ago. And it's I think these things are happening all over the country, and unless you're kind of in the loop and you know about them, but it's really interesting.
Brilliant. So going back to your writing and your poetry, is there anyone that you would say that inspired you to get into
great
writing?
Question. I think it goes back to my childhood. So my parents used to read to me a lot, and we always had books everywhere. So I think people like Shirley Hughes, who's a children's author and poet, A.A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh. Like those early, I think those are the early memories that I have of writing and story. I think stories is really important. Poetry is just the way that you form it, express it, deliver it. But I think I fell in love with stories before I can really remember. It's a really core memory of mine, and I think that's where it kind of feeds from. And I'm not trained in this. I don't have a classical background. I'm a scientist by training, so I am trying to broaden my knowledge and my experience with other poets in my kind of area, but also in all sorts of areas. And there are so many people writing so many amazing things, so that's been really enlightening to kind of realise that creativity in the written word is still something that is really a big part of a lot of people's lives, not just at work but outside of work as well.
I think it's a fundamental part of all of our lives, whether we realise it or not. And do you think that's something that your son will take on?
Yeah,
or
I
hope
so. Yeah, I mean, he loves stories already. He's learning to read now, which I'm so proud of him. He's doing so well. But I think that's really interesting as well. It wasn't until my son started to learn to read that I realised how complicated language is.
Yes.
We kind of take it for granted because we learn so young, and it's so big a part of our lives that I certainly did. I certainly didn't realise how much learning is involved in, being able to sound the letters out and build the words and be able to recognise the patterns, and to, especially with English, to recognise when the sounds are different in different contexts.
Or spelt differently.
Or simple things like using exclamation marks and question marks is a completely alien term to him, because he's not had any reason to know about that until now. And so I think a lot of things like this are helped by seeing things through a child's eyes. I think that's something that I've found really fascinating to watch as he discovers the world, and language is one of those things.
I think it's kind of watching the world through a child's eyes is so they're so naive, and it's all so simple that actually I think we end up as adults overcomplicating things, and we end up seeing the complexities, and that's how we end up so stressed, I think. Whereas you look at a child, and when they're learning and, like you say, developing language, you strip it right back to its normal form, things that we, like you say, take for granted completely. So I don't doubt that he's picking up all of these tiny little things that you probably don't even notice, that he's subliminally taking in. And
he definitely like if he hears a new word, he'll practice using that word, and I think it's just the cutest thing. But I think we get really caught up in education and schools and sitting exams and being able to read and be able to write, and all of those things are really important. But I think there's mums everywhere teaching their kids soft skills, being able to socialise, being able to be independent, being able to question things, being able to explore the world. Like, there's so much that mums kind of do every single day and help their children grow. And it's been, he asks me questions that just blow my mind, because I've never considered it. They're just things that he'll say, why is this? And I'll think, I have no idea, and I've never questioned it
and
myself.
You have to get Google up.
I spent my entire life getting Google up saying, like, do bats have teeth, or whatever it is.
I really should know the answer to this.
I've never even considered that there will be an answer to this. But I think that I think that for me, poetry is a bit like a child's way of viewing the world, because you don't have many, poems vary in length, but you don't have many words. Kind of sometimes restricted by the form or the rhyming scheme or whatever it is that you're going to use. So it forces you, certainly forces me, to focus on a topic or to focus on a story, but very succinctly. Like you haven't got the space to write 3 chapters to introduce a character. You've got a line, and so I think it's very similar to the way that children look at the world. The two things for me are quite naturally combined. I also write poetry for children, so children's stories.
Yeah.
And it's working towards making it as simple and easy to understand, but you can include so much complexity still. You can still have emotion, you can still have dramatic whatever,
humour.
I mean, kids really get humour. My son knows how jokes work, but he doesn't understand what makes them funny, so he just makes them up. And it's it's that ability to just learn something and then experiment with it and play with it. And I think for me sometimes poetry is about playing with words and seeing what I can create with them, and kind of giving myself permission to play.
Absolutely. It's almost like letting in that inner child.
Absolutely.
It's your time to be free and to just let your thoughts run wild as your son would.
Yes, absolutely.
So your evenings when your son's gone to bed, you're able to kind of say, let's get all the toys out, in effect all of your words, and you're sat there and you're writing and you're thinking, and it's your freedom to kind of just let go and say what you need to.
And I think creativity, whatever form your creativity takes, is often like that, I think.
Absolutely.
And the people who are producing their best work are probably doing it in a place of play and discovery and exploration, and so I for me it's poetry, but I think being able to express yourself in some way, whether it's just for yourself or whether you then go on to share it with somebody or whatever, I think that's really important. I think it's really important to who you are and your just your mental health, your well-being.
Most definitely.
So it's certainly had that effect on me.
Yeah. And just going into the mental health, I know that we spoke prior about like lockdown and your struggles within motherhood and being far away from home. Can you delve into that a little bit more about how your feelings about lockdown and the kind of the pressures?
Sure. So I had my son, I think it was 5 days before the first lockdown.
Wow.
So when I gave birth, we knew something was happening, but we didn't really know what.
Yeah.
We didn't know what the consequences would be. So I went home with a newborn baby, and then everything shut down.
Wow.
And my mum, we'd organised for my mum to come up when my husband's parental leave ended, so 2 weeks, but of course we were deep in lockdown by then, so she couldn't come. And so I'm not gonna lie, it was really tough. We were on our own, it was our first child, and suddenly we were completely isolated. Thank goodness for video calls, because we did use that a lot, but it was something that was quite challenging, and at the time I would have said absolutely the worst thing that could have happened, but looking back I kind of think one of the things that it gave me was just really dedicated time with my son. We weren't having visitors, we weren't having to try, didn't feel any pressure to get up and get changed and go out and get on with my life, because I couldn't.
Visitors just arriving.
Yes. and so I can see that there were positives to that period, but no, it was really tough. And I think when you hear people talking about that time, those years where this was going on, we kind of forget that there were new mums, and we kind of forget that there were families that were isolated, and it did have an impact. And it'll be really interesting to see if later, when more time has passed, whether there was an impact on the kids as well.
Absolutely.
Because my son was very young. He was a tiny baby, so socially it probably didn't have as much impact as it would have done if he was older. But you know, all the kids that couldn't go to school, you know, there were so many parents out there just with their world upside down, just as many other people where it wasn't just parents,
but for different reasons.
And so yeah, it wasn't the easiest time. I wouldn't recommend having a baby in a lockdown. It does make it much more intense as an experience, but we survived it.
In an already intense experience,
absolutely,
it's highlighted tenfold. I don't doubt.
I'm sure. But yes, we survived, and it, I don't think it's had any, you know, long-lasting impact on our relationship or anything like that, you know.
In fact, like you say, I think it's probably made you stronger.
Yeah, probably. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting about how we remember those periods, because I mean, I don't know about you, but I found that particularly those first 6 weeks or so, it's really just a blur. I don't really remember it. It just feels like a sort of a dream behind fog. That doesn't really make sense, but I feel really disconnected from it.
Absolutely.
Because there's so much, well, your world has completely changed. No one told you it was going to change. I mean, no, I don't think anyone can tell you.
No,
I don't think anyone
not.
can express how that feels.
No, and it's something you have to be in to understand completely what all of these parents in the past have said about, oh yeah, I bet you'll be really grateful for some sleep at some point. You go, why are you saying that?
Yeah, I mean, sleep deprivation for new parents is real, and it's tough.
And a lot more serious than I think we kind of let on, because we joke about it and we say, I'm low on sleep. But actually, when it comes down to functioning, even talking and trying to form sentences, I can remember just being in this brain fog of not knowing what I was really saying or doing.
Absolutely.
So.
I mean, and we're expected to just carry on, you know, expected to get in the car and drive. I mean, that's something that terrifies me. And it's not something that just you have to put up with for a few weeks and then it goes away.
No,
it carries on. I mean, my son is 5 in March, and I still have nights where I don't get any sleep because for whatever reason we have a disturbed night. And so there's this long-term impact on parents, on mothers of, you know, I'm expected to function normally, but I'm basically going through the torture of not just not having much sleep, but having such disturbed sleep. That's the thing that I find the most difficult, and especially in the early days, is it's not that you're only getting a block of 4 hours, it's that you're not getting more than 20 minutes at a time. And those are different things.
It's that broken sleep, isn't it? And I don't think our brains function like that.
Absolutely.
So I think in order for you to have such an impact creatively, I think is amazing, because it's another part of your brain. And I think in order to be creative, you really, really have to be invested. Your mind has got to be in it. So I think juggling motherhood, broken sleep, starting school, teaching, it's a huge achievement. It really, really is. So you should be really, really proud of yourself.
That's very kind, thank you.
And I think, again, as mums, we don't really get as much recognition for ourselves that we're owed. I think I think you get, I noticed then you go, oh, thank you, and we kind of cower,
shrinking on ourselves.
And we absolutely shouldn't. We should be proud of what we're doing, and especially if we're having an impact on other people, because I think your poetry, and I'm going to ask you to kindly read something out for us in a moment, is going to help and relate to so many people, whether they were exactly in your position, whether they had a newborn in lockdown or whether they had a 5-year-old in lockdown. I think your words of the struggles, but also the wonderful times, are going to relate to so many people, and it's poetry I wish I saw in those 6 weeks. It really is. I am wondering whether you could give us a little snippet of something, if possible.
I tell you what, I will read you. So the book's called Not Just a Mum, and this is the first of the 2 poems. Not Just a Mum.
Brilliant.
So I'm not just a mum, I realise, but a teacher of right and wrongs, narrator of stories and rhymes, and performer of cheerful songs. A cook, a dietitian, a tempter to try out new foods and tastes, an artist assistant with pens and paints, and cleaner of glittery pastes. I'm a persistent laundry warrior with piles of washing on the floor, a nappy changer, bath maker, nail clipper, and the parent you always ask for. I'm a tantrum tamer, a boundary holder, my arms creating a safe space, playmate, toy mender, book reader, someone to tickle and chase. I'm your pillow and source of comfort when your tiny body is full of flu, your detective and investigator when you've lost something dear to you. I'm your comforter holding you gently when nightmares haunt you at night, mediator to help you share and be kind when a tempting toy results in a fight. I organise and lead great adventures, buy you ice cream in a cone, splash in puddles in the pouring rain, make sure you're never alone. I support you to be brave and try, reassure when something goes wrong, show you how to be kind and how in your loving family you belong. You see, I'm not just a mum, really. I try to do all that it takes. Roles and responsibilities so endless, a full-time job with no sick leave or breaks. But I wouldn't change it for a minute, even though I'm exhausted to my core. Being your mother is my priority now. I am yours forevermore.
Oh. Oh my goodness, I have to hold back the tears. That is so beautiful.
Thank you.
It really is beautiful. And how does it feel when you read that out? So, for example, you're at the open mic spoken word. How does it feel when you're writing your vulnerable thoughts?
Yeah, I find that really interesting because sometimes the poetry that I find myself feeling most vulnerable about, I have no problem performing. I stand up and I'm kind of waiting for that emotion to rise and it doesn't. But then sometimes it catches me unawares and I'll be all my poetry is quite personal. It's sort of my story. So of course it's very much linked to my feelings and my emotions. But yeah, I get caught out sometimes. I'll be reading something that I didn't realise that there was that kind of such a big emotional connection to, and it would just hit me. So I think it's really interesting how your brain kind of taps into emotions at different times.
Yes, without almost feeling like you're in control of it.
Completely, yes.
I can imagine some words would trigger something and then you can feel the waterworks starting or a lump in your throat.
Yeah, and I start to trip over my words, and often that is because it's sort of, for some reason in that moment, it has hit me. I think the other thing is that if the audience responds to something as you're reading, that can kind of be interesting as well and kind of trigger that as well.
Definitely. And I can imagine having some feedback from the crowd can be quite daunting.
Yeah, let's be completely honest. To start with, I would stand up and I would get 2/3 of the way through and I would be shaking so much that I couldn't see the words on the paper anymore. This is not something that comes naturally to me. I hate being the centre of attention. The idea of standing up and sharing something so vulnerable is not something that I feel really that comfortable with to start with. But I kind of felt, I talk about this in the book quite a lot, I kind of feel like I'm finding my voice again. And for me, part of that is not just finding my voice and writing, it's about finding my voice and sharing it. And that became quite important to me. And so I found that actually, although it's something that genuinely I find very difficult to do, it's very rewarding and it's something that I actually now quite enjoy. I can even complete a poem without shaking so much, so there's progress.
Absolutely.
So that's like personal development, but I think it's more than that. I think it's that I feel comfortable that my voice exists and that I can share it and that there's some value in doing that. doesn't have to be something that everybody likes.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something that everybody can relate to. It's about me sharing my story about where I am. And I think that's very powerful, and I think we often shy away from doing that. We kind of put up that mask.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is where we started, really, in the conversation of, we sort of pretend that everything's okay. We pretend that we're under control.
We put up this barrier, don't we?
Completely. And so I think for me, this is starting to take down that barrier and say, I'm not perfect. I don't need to pretend to be perfect. I can be a great mum and struggle with motherhood.
Yes. Yeah.
I can have no idea what my future looks like, or where I'm going, but still know that I'm doing the best I can for me and my son. You don't have to. Doesn't have to be all or nothing.
Yes.
You can be, I've got the rest of my life to work out what I'm doing with my life, and that's okay. And I think it's being kind. It's so natural to be encouraging and empathetic and supportive to my son, but I don't do it to myself.
Yes, and ultimately we're the carer. We've got to be almost number one, because we are so responsible for our child. And I think that's something that we're almost ingrained to forget, because we're so worried about whether they're warm enough. Have you had enough to eat? Do you need a drink? Things like this, that we then go, oh, actually, I've not drunk anything today. I'm then getting exhausted because I've not taken care of the carer. And I think that's something that doesn't come naturally to us when you're in that position.
Absolutely. And I think actually it's really important. I think it's really important to be kind to yourself. I think it's really important to take that pressure off. I think it's really important to recognise the small wins. My kid's fine, he's gone to bed happy and warm and loved, and I managed to do a load of laundry. I don't have to have all the things that society says I need to have right now. Being a good mum could be enough.
Absolutely.
Being a good mum who's looking after herself and doing things that she wants to do is enough.
Definitely.
And you don't have to be perfect. It's okay. It's okay not to be. By the way, no one else is either.
Yes, so take that pressure off yourself.
It doesn't exist. It's what you see on social media, what you see people talking about. It's not real. It doesn't exist.
It's what they want you to see, isn't it?
And you're measuring yourself against something that isn't real, and therefore you're always going to fail to those expectations because you can't do it. You can't do everything.
I know, it's unrealistic, isn't it? But again, I think society's standards are so strong nowadays, and with, like you say, the pressures of social media being everywhere. Everything is online, everything's visual, everything's in front of us, it's fed to us. You can't really escape it. So I think it's important with creatives such as yourself to put pen to paper again, come back to real life, come back to what's in front of us and what naturally for thousands of years we would have done. Because I think we're really starting to lose touch nowadays with what's real and also our feelings within that. But kind of going off topic a little bit, where can we find your book next month? Tell us a little bit about when it's going to be coming out and where we can find it.
It's published on the 24th of February. And you can get it on Amazon or on my website, which is katiegowers.co.uk. So you can pre-order it now.
Brilliant.
It'll be out on the 24th of February, and it's called Not Just a Mum.
Excellent. Well, I'll be doing that as soon as I leave. I'll be on the pre-orders and be there. I'll be like, I'm waiting, can't wait.
That's very kind, thank you.
How are you feeling about kind of the launch of that? Are you apprehensive? Are you excited?
I think, and it's going back to what we were just saying, I'm trying not to put any pressure on it. I'm trying to see it as a process of publishing a book rather than a process of being successful.
Yes.
So for me, this is my first book. It's my first time going through this process. I'm self-publishing, so I've done all the book cover and I've had to learn how to get it, but all of it. And so I'm trying to see it as as a process that I can learn from. And share what I'm doing and try and meet other people that that community of creatives or community of mums. So I don't really have any expectations of anyone reading it, which sounds very strange for a writer to say. I think for me at the moment it's more about having something that I have ownership of and that's authentic to me.
Yeah, something you're in control of.
Yeah, absolutely. And seeing where it takes me, really.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for coming here, Katie. We feel very grateful that you've let us in on your secret almost. That's kind of how it feels, that your poetry is like behind closed doors and you're just starting to open it and kind of let people in.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So that's it for this week's episode of Creative Conversations. You can find out more about Katie at Katie Gowers is free on Substack or www.katiegowers.co.uk. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review and share it with someone who loves creativity as much as we do. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Granary Digital. If you have a question, a guest suggestion or a creative story of your own, reach out to us at podcast@granary.digital. Until next time, keep creating and remember your story matters. Thanks for tuning in. Creative Conversations was hosted by Mia Moore. It was recorded at Granary Studios, audio production by Granary Digital. Additional production support and editing by James Jones. For more information, visit our website at granary.digital. To contact the show, email podcast@granary.digital. Please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on social media.